Hi, everyone. So here with us, we have Superintendent Schmidtan and three of our staff members. So we have me, Peggy, Chris, and Matea, and we're going to be interviewing her on, the school policy regarding the pandemic and just what's been going on with the school and what we should know and how we can help out. So without further ado, one of our students actually had a really good question to start this off, and it was, what has your personal experience been with the pandemic?
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and it's good to see some smiling faces from Fort Jeff because I certainly miss seeing all the students. It's been hard, I think, for everybody to be out of school for this amount of time. So personally, I am very fortunate right now. My family is healthy and happy. Everybody is doing well, trying to manage running a school district and doing my own work from home, and also doing the kids' work from home. So that's a little bit of a challenge as well, just like many of you, trying to manage everything all at once. So luckily, like I said, I've been okay, healthy, but I think it is hard for everybody to figure out your new normal at home and to manage all the roles of mom, worker, and everything else that you have. And then they're also socially isolating. I mean, everybody relies very much on our personal connections. So to be isolated from your friends and family, although Zoom and Google Meet are easy ways to connect, it's not the same as having your family over for a holiday or, celebrating a birthday, things like that. So I think everybody's going through that same sort of transition.
Yeah, it's been interesting kind of meeting with people online and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's different. It's not the same. There's a lot of things that you don't realize that you read from people socially, whether they're nonverbal cues or body language or the way someone leans into you or leans back from you. And sometimes it's hard to see that online, to see somebody's leg twitching because they want to get out of a meeting or something. But those are the things you don't realize how much you rely on, the social cues. So yes, I agree with you. It's definitely hard shifting to online environments.
Okay, so we kind of split it up into a couple of different groups of questions. So I'm going to start. So I guess we're going to start with the big question.
The big one first.
We asked our readers and our viewers on social media if they could send us questions. And a lot of them were kind of variations on the same question, the same like 3 or 4 questions. So our main question is at this point, our first question is at this point, do you think school might be closed for the rest of the year?
If you asked me this question last week, I might have said yes. But yesterday, there was a lot of media attention on this very question. There was Governor Cuomo working with other tri-state governors talking about reopening. Trump was on last night talking about reopening. So, initially I was kind of in despair thinking we might not reopen. But more recently, after last night, I was thinking there might be a real possibility that we could reopen. And that was a nice piece of hope to feel. Because I think a lot of us have been feeling that way. Are we ever going back? Is it ever going to start again? So I do think, hopefully right now, I have a little bit of hope that we're going to open again for the end of the year.
So my other question is, so I'm a senior. And so a lot of people in my grade, and I know in the junior year, are wondering what is going to happen with the senior prom, the graduation, J-prom, if we go back or if we don't, because it's...
Right. Yeah. So I think, we already moved the J-prom. That was already something we had already done early. We got the DJ and Danfords to move it, I think, to the end of June. I think it's like June, mid-June somewhere. So we're hopeful that we're allowed to do that. I think the hardest part of all of those questions is what happens locally or from the state level. Are they allowing gatherings of large groups? So this may not just affect graduations, but it's going to affect concerts or people's weddings or any other gatherings that were planned. Hopefully, if we do go back and we're able to have gatherings, everything would go off as usually planned. But we are thinking about what would happen if we don't go back and how would we handle that. I know some of the senior class advisors have already started to talk to the senior class officers or plan meetings with them to say, hey, how can we do college signing day, college application acceptance day in another way? What would be a cool way to do it as seniors? But I don't know if any of those decisions have been made yet. We've been kind of waiting, like how does every week look? Are they going to extend our closure another 2 weeks? You don't want to lose that hope that we're coming back, but in the same breath, I think we do have to be prepared. So depending on what we can legally do and how many people can get together, I think that'll determine what we do for prom and graduation. I think there are some districts that are doing it, already thinking about, late summer, early fall. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's even possible. I don't know if some of you are already going to be in your schools at that time. Right. Or are you going to be available? So I think we can't promise anything yet, but we will do our best to try to make it memorable for all you seniors, regardless of how that happens.
As far as kind of student activities in general, like clubs and athletics, I know like in some places athletics were kind of shut down sometimes before the schools were shut down. And I was wondering, are like the athletics and clubs going to maybe come back after school comes back, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I don't know. Section 11 is the governing body that actually runs the Suffolk region of athletics that we're in. And so they made the decision to cancel the spring season before the governor had actually shut down the schools for this amount of time. So they are the ones that organize all the playing time and the sports and the field usage, et cetera, with each other. We do the field usage, but they organize who's playing who. And they had decided that before we started because of the rules about mass gatherings. Now, if schools reopen because the governor allows us to come back, then maybe Section 11 would reconsider that or adjust the schedule somehow, maybe give them less games or just give the end of the season. We don't know that. They are hopeful. There was an article in Newsday a few weeks ago, I think, about that. It was the Section 11 and the Nassau person as well talking about their hope for a spring season, which I think a lot of us are hoping for. If not, as far as athletics go, we have all our rosters in for varsity and junior varsity sports. So let's say you are a senior and you are playing, you can still claim that you are a spring varsity sport. You still played the varsity season of your senior year or your spring season. And even if you're a junior, you can still claim that because you were on that team, you were part of the preseason activities. So that's important. And the same thing for clubs. If you were in a club and we don't get to return and we don't get to start up clubs again, you were part of that club for the majority of the year. So it's still something that you can consider on your transcripts and on your college applications. And that was really important to us too, to make sure that that was still part of your career here in Fort Jeff.
That's good. Thank you. Might there be kind of a new way that grades would be determined reflecting what's been going on? I know some colleges have kind of turned to like pass fail kind of stuff. Would there be anything like that with us?
So we have a grading committee that we're getting together to start talking about this because of the fact exactly what you're mentioning is that the regents aren't here for a lot of the regents courses. The way you're taking tests is different. If you are taking tests, how we assess our students and see if they've learned things is different. So we have to definitely adjust how we grade. So I know that's already in the conversations. You might have known that we already moved that third marking period 2 weeks out to give everybody the chance to catch up. And we may have to do the same thing with fourth quarter. We may have to make some different decisions about the calendar for fourth quarter. It's so hard with this situation because everything changes every week. We were thinking, we'll be back on April 1st. Oh, no, we're not going to be back till April 15th. Oh, now April 29th.
Yeah.
So it feels like every week we're adjusting based on the new information. That's been the hardest part, to stay ahead of it. We did consider pass-fail, but when passing gets calculated for NCAA courses, if I think I'm saying this right, it doesn't actually count because it becomes a 65. I think that's the way it works. So there was some consideration even for our athletes with those NCAA courses and how they counted. So we didn't want to do anything to hurt kids. We didn't want to do anything to hurt your transcripts. This pandemic should not affect the rest of your life or your college experience or your transcript. So we were trying to figure out the best way to keep those grades for you without negatively affecting you in the future. So I know that's something that the teachers and the administrators are working on, and hopefully we'll have some answers for you soon about that, because I know it's hard as you're working towards something to know what you're working for.
Sorry. So some students kind of expressed concern that online learning isn't as hands-on as expected. And like, for instance, a lot of our labs are kind of very different, because we can't do the hands-on kind of stuff and science, because we're not in a physical building. Is the district currently working on any method to kind of increase that interactivity of online learning?
This has been something I think all of the districts are struggling with. I mean, when I talk to neighboring school superintendents and neighboring districts, they're having the same issues. There's a huge learning curve as you shift online. And I'm very proud of our teachers, how fast they shifted online. Some of them were already in Google Classroom, and some of them just made a Google Classroom within that 2-week period. They were already up with assignments and shifting. I think many of you were probably more ready for that Google Classroom than some of the teachers were.
Yeah.
And I think there's and I just am so amazed at them, because given the situation, and as you mentioned earlier, the personal troubles that everybody has in dealing with the pandemic, you're starting, it's like a grief, a feeling of grief, as we're all self-isolated and worried and anxious about our loved ones, or when will life get back to normal. So everybody has the emotional component of it, including the students. And so that was a lot of our struggle, is to be able to say, are all kids able to be online like they would be in a high school exactly at 7:20 every day? And, your online learning at home looks very different at home, and you manage your own schedules. You think about what your family needs, and you think about what your own self needs, and you adjust yourself. So we tried to make a schedule that was somewhat flexible for people, but we didn't want to mandate or have kids be negatively affected if they couldn't get online. So let's say, they're watching younger siblings, or they have limited devices in their house. How do we ensure that everybody can get on at that time? We've heard instances of spotty Wi-Fi, or again, single devices, or who's working and watching the kids. And so to say everybody has to be on at this time is really hard for a lot of families. So we were trying to be flexible. And some teachers are doing it. They're recording lessons and they're putting them up, or they're having meets or individual catch-ups to see how people are doing. So I really trust our teachers, and I know you guys do too, in the way they're handling things and knowing which of you can handle an online lesson or which of you can handle something that's an assignment. And I know that they're extremely responsive. So a lot of them have been communicating through email or Remind or Google Classroom and all those things to say, how's it going? I know for my kindergartners, they just have a weekly Google Meet where there's no content. It's just a, hey, how are you guys doing type of thing. They get to share their stuffed animal and a snack. And I think that's what a lot of us miss, is the social interaction of seeing your friends. It's not so much about the content, but the connection we have with our staff. So I really stress with our staff that connection component. And listen, the content is very important. It's what Port Jeff is about. It's about curriculum and content. But I think for us, the connections are even more important. We are so tight-knit in Port Jeff. And, we miss each other. We miss seeing our teachers. We miss our friends. I don't know if every child on the island feels that way, in their school district, but I know for Port Jeff, we do. And so as much as I'd like to mandate everybody, do this, do that, I don't think we can do that in these kinds of times. I think we really have to leave it up to our professionals. And we have really talented teachers who will work on that. But what I would encourage you to do as students is, if you're feeling that way, if you're feeling like, gosh, I really need help with something, I would love a live online something, you communicate that to your teachers. You say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Because I think if you tell them that, I know they'll be responsive to you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're saying this assignment's really hard or this lab is really challenging for me, I know that they'll get back to you with an alternate or a way to help you. Whether it's live or not, I know that they'll be able to help you through that. So I think communication is really important during these times.
Yeah, I know a lot of our teachers have kind of, at least my teachers have been kind of like, hey, we're kind of doing this for the first time as well as you are. So if you have any suggestions, let us know. And it's been really nice.
Yeah, I think that's the way everybody's working on it. Nobody can say we know everything at this point. Mm-hmm. And if you keep communicating and giving feedback in a very respectful and appropriate way, I think they'll be responsive to you. So I would encourage you guys to do that.
Okay, so if we don't end up coming back before the end of the year, how would finals be affected?
Well, that's part of the grading conversation we've been having. How do we do finals? Because even AP had to adjust their whole way they give AP exams because of the environment that we're in. So we obviously would have to adjust the way finals look as well if we have finals. I mean, we don't have regions. So we're really talking about not having that region score count because there's nothing to count, obviously. I know that's usually part of your final grade. But could we substitute some type of final? Could there be something? And every course is so different. And we were having a conversation today about ceramics. We're like, okay, there's no kiln. Like, how are they, what are they doing for that? Or, so some of the things, like you said, the hands-on courses are a lot more challenging to talk about with finals. So I think we just have to keep those conversations open and figure out a solution. I don't have an answer yet for you, but it's definitely been on the radar and talked about amongst us.
Right. So for the class of 2021, I know that's Peggy and Matea are part of that. Do you have any kind of advice for them to get back on track, what with SATs being canceled and a lot of that kind of college prep stuff kind of derailing?
Yeah, I think that, I want to say this the right way, but you're almost going to get a pass, if that makes any sense. I mean, the New York State is going to issue guidance on how we even code on your transcript the regions that you were supposed to take this year. So it's almost like you're going to have a COVID excuse column for those courses. And but I think that's important because that means every kid in New York State would be reflected the same way. It wouldn't be something that you would be detrimental to you, only you. And of course, this is happening across the country. So there is an entire junior class across the country that's going through this to say, my college plans are delayed or whatever's happening. So I think you'll have opportunities for SAT. I think that's going to happen, come in the fall if you want to get those scores up and things like that. And I do think that your transcripts will have those COVID excuse columns, so to speak, with some notes about that. And when you go through your application process and you use the Common App, there is opportunity for you to explain those things and say, what the circumstances are. It might even make a great college essay when you talk about some of the challenges that you went through and during these times. It really is historic. I mean, it's being equated to the Great Depression, times in history that we'll never experience again, or hopefully never experience again.
Hopefully.
So, I don't love being part of history. I like learning about history. It's more challenging when you're experiencing it. But I think in a lot of ways, it's going to build a lot of resilience in a lot of our youth, to go through something like this and how we can come out in a better way. And I think it will help you in your college experience. You're probably doing a lot more things independently at home this last month than you've ever done, whether it be laundry or cleaning or cooking. And so when you go to college, you'll be a little more prepared to do those things. And you probably have a little bit more life skills this month. So again, just trying to find that positive in what's happening to you. I think many of you will be able to get right back on track for college as a junior. I do think that you'll have the time and ample opportunity. And I know our guidance department is so good at those things. Some of you are already having your junior conferences virtually and going through all the conversations you would have. So I am confident that they'll continue to help you get on track and you'll have those opportunities. But use it as a rainbow too. Use it as an opportunity to talk about how you grew from this experience.
Yeah, speaking as someone who's kind of gone through that college admissions process, I remember that something that I hadn't expected for the Common App to have was those spots where you could say, hey, if your grades dropped at this point, let us know why.
Right.
And I'd expect it to be really cutthroat, but it wasn't. And so I just remembered that they had that now. So
yeah. It'll help because you're able to explain, hey, this was the COVID year.
COVID.
This was the year that this happened. It was a global pandemic. It wasn't me. That's a really important part to put there. And it'll take 4 years for all those children in high school right now to cycle through. And so you'll see that on transcripts for the next 4 years with students.
Okay, I have one more question of my part of this, and then they have. So This is actually kind of something that we already addressed.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just saying that like some students have kind of felt overwhelmed about finding time to do things that like their parents have asked them in addition to the kind of school stuff. And you already addressed that with the...
Yeah, and I would say the same thing I'm telling you about talking to your teachers. I would encourage you to talk to your parents as well. Your parents are going through their own things too. Everybody is going through this right now. And I did read an article in the Times about equating it to grief, the cycle of grief, how you go through something, you're like mourning your old life. And some of us are really mourning the normalcy of what we knew. And we're sad about it. And then sometimes we're angry about it. And then sometimes we're overwhelmed about it. So you're going to experience all those emotions as, a young person, and your families are too. So the same thing I would encourage you with your teachers, I would say the same things to your parents. Hey, I'm having trouble today. I can't manage all this, mom, dad, whoever in the house. I've had my kids have some moments, and they're young, so they don't understand how to express themselves. So sometimes it comes out in other ways. So, as a mom, I have to know, all right, we're done with schoolwork today. Like, we're just taking a break because, you need a break today. And everybody's really dealing with the mental anguish of this. And that's really what I equate it to. It's a rough situation for everybody. Yeah. So we have to be sensitive to that. And I think if you just communicate that, you're all, intelligent young adults who can say to your parents in an appropriate way, hey, I'm struggling today. So you need to be able to say that to both your teachers and your parents, and they will find a way to help you if they know it. But if they don't know it, they can't help you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you. Those are my questions. Now on to these amazing people.
You're up, Peggy.
So for me, I was really interested when I first reached out to you in like how these sorts of decisions are made among all of administration, because they're pretty hefty decisions, especially at the beginning, because the state and like the national government, like they weren't really giving much about how these things should be done. So how did like our administrative offices kind of navigate that area?
So I'll go back for you. We started to get a few phone calls, probably in February from parents or concerned people about what was happening. A couple of doctors in the area were kind of saying, hey, this may blow up. What's our plan? So it was on our radar. And then in March, I was actually up in Albany, and they had the New York State Department of Health together with, it was a conference for superintendents. They had us with all superintendents. And it was about March 3rd, I think. And at that moment, for me personally, I realized this was going to be a big deal. For them to bring the State Department of Health in with, the entire state of superintendents, I said, okay, there's more to this story. But to your point, Peggy, there wasn't a lot of coordinated communication at first. And then we got home, and there was a Suffolk County Department of Health meeting for school superintendents. And it's funny now to think about it, but they brought us into an auditorium, and we sat next to each other. And there was no confirmed cases in Suffolk at the time. And they went through, reminding us about appropriate social distancing and coughing in your elbow. And, there wasn't really this concern the way that they are now about the social distancing, the gathering. At that time, I don't even think they believed that people could be asymptomatic and still be carriers. I think they thought it was only symptomatic people, and they were really stressing, stay home if you're sick. And then very quickly, all of a sudden after that, I think it was New Rochelle, when they had the New Rochelle cluster, and you saw the way it started spreading upstate. And I'm really talking regionally, not necessarily nationally. We were saying, okay, now New Rochelle schools are closed. How long does it take to come from, how long does this virus have to spread from New Rochelle down to the island or through the city, et cetera? And then everything kind of happened very quickly, to your point. It was all of a sudden, neighboring school districts were making decisions for themselves. We're closing. And then it was, well, do we close ourselves? That's the consideration we made. We have no cases, but do we close preventatively, or are we to be told to be closed? And then it was the conversation between governors and county executives. County executives shut us down first, and the governor decided. So there was this whole, you could see the power shifting, as you said, like there wasn't this coordinated communication that was immediate. It took a little while to happen. But once the governor made the decision to close for us, and he took that responsibility off the county executives, I think the county executives were getting frustrated because they were getting the pressure to close, whether it was Nassau or whether it was Suffolk or upstate. And so they were saying, hey, governor, you do it. No, you do it. Nobody wanted to make the decision, I think, at the point. Because I don't think everybody realizes, I do think everybody realizes how important schools are to the economy and to families and to everything that goes through. So I think there was a real concern about what would happen if we closed schools and the effects on families. So I think they were really worried about making that decision. But when they finally did, then I think the communication and the coordination was much improved. We have local organizations that were coordinating conference calls with Suffolk County Department of Health. We were on conference calls with the State Education Department and the Deputy Commissioner from the Governor's Office. So they really started to get themselves together in terms of communication right around that March 13th week, when they finally made all these decisions. And since then, I have to say that the communication's been really good between the county executive's office, between the governor's office, New York State Education Department. But it took a little while to get there. It wasn't like, hey, we're all coordinated, because nobody expected it to go this fast. I think that was the part. Some of us were warned, but nobody really believed that it was going to happen, I think.
And even when you were in that kind of limbo area, where you didn't know what to do and there was a lot of confusion, I remember the first day of distance learning, the teachers had sent out a bunch of stuff. And then 2 days later, they were like, wait a second, don't do any of that. This is actually your spring break. What was going on there?
So what happened is at first it was, you're closed without any guidance, and that was part of it. So when the governor orders an executive order, he puts it out verbally first, and then it usually takes a few days before the actual written document comes out to say, what are the conditions of this executive order? And everybody waits for that. He makes an announcement, everybody waits for the written part, because that's where the devil's in the details, right? So that's what happened. We get this executive order, we're closed, we're good, go to distance learning. And then there was a line in there about exhausting your snow days and your spring break. And so it was this rush to understand, what does this mean? Does it mean we need to use them? Does it mean we need to move them? What are we, and so we were back and forth about that. And so ultimately, in the absence of that clarity, we said, you know what? Hold it. Let's move up our spring break. Let's move up our snow days, and we'll see what happens. There's still not complete clarity because different people interpret every executive order differently. And so, we're kind of working on the assumption that we'll get our 180 days in, because the 180 days is tied to state aid and it's tied to a whole bunch of things through the State Education Department. Although the governor's saying he's waiving that requirement, it's not, again, the details are what we're trying to figure out on the little parts of it. So, but in some ways, I think it was a good thing. I think everybody needed a minute to adjust. For you to say, holy cow, I'm home, I'm self-isolating, I'm social distancing, and I've got to do all this stuff. I think for some people, it would have been too much. So the timing was perfect. It gave everybody a little bit of a breath. Some people still did some things to keep engaged intellectually. And some AP teachers still needed some stuff done, depending on if you were in an AP course. But I think it just gave everybody a second to figure it all out as well. So that was kind of the reason we did that, and kind of gave oh, wait, hold on, stop, start. I know it felt confusing, because it certainly felt confusing for us too. But that's what happened in terms of that. And I think we made the best choice, because once we went through the little bit of time, a little bit of break, it was like, all right, everybody was ready to go. Everybody was ready to get through distance learning. So I think it did help us in a lot of ways.
That's good, though, that we were able to figure it out at the end.
Yeah. At the end, we did it. We figured it out somewhere.
Yeah. Let's see. I guess another question that has to go with the last one is the whole feeling that this is kind of surreal, and what you say to the students a lot of times, it could cause panic, not just among students, but the faculty too. How do you choose how to present that sort of information?
It's kind of judgment in some ways. and that was, even when I came back in March, I mentioned that earlier, I came back from Albany and I was like, okay, this is going to be a big deal. We didn't talk about it like it was going to be a big deal, because what if we were wrong? What if it was held off in Washington and didn't come over to New York or whatever? So it's tough. It's a tough decision. You want to be transparent and you want to give them the information they need, but you don't want to scare people either. So that's also why we don't want to make too many decisions about the end of the year yet if we don't know the information yet. How do you really have to make sure you have the right information in front of you before you make a decision. So that's some of the decision making that happens. It's weighing out the pros and the cons. Is this worth sharing right now? And if I don't share it, what's going to be the consequences of not sharing information? And that's the delicate balance you go through all the time in any leadership role. And your parents probably go through the same thing, and whatever they're choosing to share with you as a family, or what you're choosing to share in the public, if you're a politician, etc. There's always a consequence for what you share. So I think you have to weigh that, and we don't want kids to be panicked, and we're very concerned about our students' mental health right now. I'm concerned about everybody's mental health right now, my own family, because it's such a trying time. So I think you have to be armed with facts, but there's no real perfect answer on how you balance what to share. It's a judgment call a lot of the time.
I think we had like a little thing on mental health in the help section, but because we brought it up, is there like any place like involved with the school where like students can go to for mental health, or like call for mental health?
Yeah, so we have a whole section of the website that's devoted to mental health, and we debated this a lot about whether or not we were going to have like a Google form or a check-in or things like that. But the more we thought about it, again, back to the personal connection, reaching out to the psychologist, the social worker, or even a trusted adult that you have in the building, whether it's just a teacher or somebody you feel comfortable with. We wanted to stress that for you. Our director of special education made a little video reminding everybody about what they could do for mental health and what the process would be. And we've been stressing that also with our teachers. If they haven't heard from a student, or if somebody hasn't signed on to their classroom or responded to an email, who's calling to follow up, and making sure we make those attempts to get in touch with people who haven't been around. But we also need to hear from you. If you're struggling, we need to know as well, and reach out to those people that you need. It's not easy. And us being apart physically, it makes that connection even harder, because usually you would just knock on one of your trusted adults' doors, as you're going by that office or that hallway, and say, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? And it's a lot easier when you see a face in the hallway than it is to reach out virtually. So we're really trying to encourage that and making those sections. But if you had any suggestions on how to help too, that would be great as well.
This mental health video, could I find that on the website to link it, or?
Yes,
okay.
I can even I can share the page with you when we're done here too, so that way you have it. You don't have to go digging for it, because our website's not that friendly yet.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would love that, so I can just like link it right onto ours.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And I guess just the last few policy questions would be, like, experts have said that a return to normalcy would have to be gradual. So if we do open before the end of the year, like, how does the district decide when to come back?
So like I mentioned before, it's all in the governor's hands right now. Even the county executive can't necessarily override or make a decision about school closures. It's really in the governor's hands. So we'll be watching that. And then if we're getting the green light, we'd have to kind of decide what does that look like for us? Are there assemblies, or what's happening? I don't know. I don't know what the restrictions would be at that time, if and when we come back. But really right now, based on the governor's action, it's not a local decision. It's a state level decision. And so, yes, the superintendent always has the ability to close schools. But in this kind of situation, it's really coming from Governor Cuomo. And then if we are allowed back, and then we'll have to decide, do we have confirmed cases? Do we have, situations that may be different for us in Port Jefferson than maybe different for the rest of the state? You have so much coverage on your website about Suffolk being a hotspot. I don't know what will be like when we return. So we'll see. But it's not a policy, it's more of a directive I have to take from the state government. And then we have to decide what that would look like when we come back.
So my question to kind of like help in the community. I know as a part of the Interact Club and Varsity Club last week, I got reminders from Mrs. Filippi and Mr. Rosen about, there's supply drives at the school for, old iPads, which I thought was really interesting, and, granola bars and protein bars, which is really helpful. Mr. Rosen, I know, emailed us probably 2 weeks ago or a week ago about, the reading initiative for the younger students. All the classes got that email, which is great. So I just wanted to kind of ask you about, in addition to those ways, maybe how can students help the community?
Yeah. Well, we have, and because you're part of Interact, which is part of the Rotary, the Port Jefferson Rotary. The Port Jefferson Rotary had reached out to us and said, they were asking for some cheer. So one of the things we did, which the PR company is working on, was about those little pictures and things about cheer. And we asked very specifically, because the contact in St. Charles, and we said, what can we do to help? Because you feel powerless to help these healthcare workers who are working such long hours and things like that. And, we were offering a ton of things. And, just to your point about the iPads, what they were mentioning is that often when someone comes into the emergency room or the hospital, they may have their phone, they may not have their charger with them. And they are, isolated from their family members when they're a COVID patient. So the only way they can communicate is either through, like a FaceTime or a Skype app or things like that. So they were looking for these devices to actually help patients communicate with their families when they were isolated in the hospital. And that's pretty scary when you think about it. Originally, we were looking at our own and to see, we have some iPads that are old, but they couldn't handle the new software, so we couldn't donate them. But so that's when we started that drive, and it is really heartbreaking to think about. Like, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about right now. And of course, as a tight-knit community, we wanted to help. So that's why we coordinated that with Ms. Filippi and Ms. Rosen and say, what can we do? At one point, I was asking, okay, can we give chapstick? Can we give, what do they need? And they requested these power bars, granola bars, and Gatorade. They said that in their PPE, it's hot, it's sweaty, and they don't often have time to eat. So they're trying to stay hydrated with, Gatorade and power drinks and a very quick snack, to keep them going. So that's what we focused on for that drive. It's not what I would expected them to ask for. And they couldn't take anything paper. So we were thinking we'd make cards and letters, and they said they couldn't take the paper things. They'd have to have it in like a digital form. So it was interesting because you see a lot of that, and you're saying, "Oh, I want to help," but to not be able to put paper is an interesting challenge. I am not sure what else we can do in terms of supporting our local hospitals. We have 2 hospitals right here in the area, 3 if you count Stony Brook. And we have reached out. They were really a few weeks ago looking for that personal protective equipment, that PPE. So we had some extra gloves and some extra hand sanitizing wipes that weren't being used in the district that we donated. I think since then there has been some federal relief from the federal stockpile to help replenish the hospital. So they haven't been asking for that as much. But I think the one thing, and it's on your list, but I'll mention it now, is the county executive is concerned about students gathering, not appropriately practicing social distancing. So he was launching this campaign, peer-to-peer, where if you were posting something on, social media, whether it be Instagram or Twitter or TikTok even, that you're using the hashtags that he provides to promote social distancing, so that they can then in turn retweet or re-promote those little videos or those little snippets, because a lot of the kids are not. And it's hard. I mean, even in my neighborhood, you see some of the kids getting together. It's hard to explain to young children or even teens who think they're invincible about the importance of social distancing. So that's one way I think you can definitely help out. And then continue to bring your ideas to us. If you're thinking about, okay, this would be great, can we do this? I saw this on social media. There's so many great ideas floating around right now. It's hard for us to manage them all. So if you have ideas, we'd be happy to listen and say. We've been even working with Infant Jesus Pantry. So we provide lunches and breakfast daily. And so they're not always picked up by families. So if they're not picked up, we actually deliver them the extras to Infant Jesus Pantry. So I know Infant Jesus Pantry was one of the local food banks in the area, that help our local families. And they were really in need. They were looking for things like bread, eggs, toilet paper, of course, paper towels, frozen meat, things like that. So any of those local food drives or things to help out our community would be great. But we would love to hear from you too, to see what you think would help.
So we kind of actually crossed out some questions. So I think the final thing is I think we need to really reiterate because, where can students, go and who can students talk to / communicate with if they're struggling at home, if they need to get help for mental health. I know we discussed on the school website the helpful video that Peggy will post the link of. And for food, I know the school is providing a lunch and service, which is very helpful. So I just thought maybe if you could talk about that a little bit in more detail about the food situation, how that's being addressed.
So the meals are available three times a week. Excuse the dog, sorry. 3 times a week at the high school during the patio. And what happens is you get them on Monday, so you get actually 2 breakfast meals and 2 lunch meals on a Monday. Wednesday, you'd also get 2 breakfast meals and 2 lunch meals. And then on Friday, you actually get 3 meals for the weekend. So, initially there wasn't much of a subscription to it. I think people were just adjusting. And, my fear is as time goes on and situations change and unemployment continues to rise, that different families will have different needs. So it's available. It's not like there's any questions asked. It's just come get your lunch and get your breakfast and, you pick them up and you leave. So that's available from 11 to 1, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays at the high school patio area. And then, of course, there are your local food banks. And they've even sponsored some things with like the 5th season catering lunches and things like that. I had put something out on social media about that. The village has a lot of great resources of local areas that you can go to if you're in need of meals. And so that was a big push from the governor's office, from every office about, for some families, lunch or meals here, it may be your only support. And again, it depends on the area and the need, but that's available those 3 days a week. And for mental health, I really think because of Port Jess and the way we are, I really do think I would stress to you to make those connections, like I said, to the people that to help you. And any of the other prevention lines that you would have, especially if it's an immediate need, and we have all those available as well to you because it's not like school. If you have something immediate and you really need to call, and you also need to help each other. And I mean that because just like you would at school when you would say, hey, so-and-so is not right or something's bothering them, they seem sad or they need some support, I would encourage you to do the same thing. I spoke to so-and-so through FaceTime and they seemed a little sad. Could you reach out to them? Or whatever you would usually do in school, just continue to do that in a virtual environment for one another. You're all very supportive of one another. It's just a little bit harder when you're away from each other. So you have to continue to do that even in a virtual environment, but use the same resources you would as if school was open. Just a little bit harder to get in touch with somebody and not just grab them in the hallway like you usually would. You have to really push for it. So we would hope you would still do that too with each other. You're our best resources. You know each other the best. You're on each other's social media. You're on each other's, accounts. Each other enough to know if someone, needs some support. So we would really encourage you to reach out for each other as well.
Well, that's it for me, Peggy.
Yeah. So, do you think that there are any news, policy changes, school updates, or anything that you would like for students to know or is relevant to students that we didn't cover today?
No, I think we covered the regions, and I think that, the conversations are the big ones, the prom and all the things that were still up in the air. But I appreciate you guys inviting me on your show. I'll call it a show. But I do appreciate it because even for me, I'm trying to step out of my comfort zone and do more of these things and doing video updates and things like that. So people feel connected, and you're the people we serve. You're our students. So in any way we can communicate or improve, I'd love to hear from you guys.
Thank you so much. And we'll be sure to like tell people like when we do post this video that if they have any ideas or concerns, they can always just email the school.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.